Well, as you all know, the TTC and public transit in general has been miserably underfunded ever since the Mike Harris era in Ontario. Had literally given up and thrown their hands up in the air about expanding the subway system, and they came up with the idea of light rail, which is not a streetcar. I have to argue with Mayor Ford on this. It is a surrogate for rapid transit, a lighter capacity, running on its own right-of-way, something similar to St. Clair, but much more elaborate than that. And Mayor Miller sponsored a planning seminar, you might say, which came up with the plan for I think it was 7 LRT lines right out into the outer suburbs. The original plan was to interconnect with the heritage streetcar system that we have in Toronto, and then later it became a separate entity. But that's another story. And Transit City, it was called. The problem is they intimated that it was a replacement for rapid transit, and it's really not. It is an intermediate level service, far superior to streetcars and buses. That was 2007, and plans were made and monies were appropriated to actually build 2 or 3 of the lines. The Eglinton line was the most elaborate and by far the most expensive, because more than half of it was in the subway-type tunnel in the narrow parts in the city of Toronto, and that's under construction now, thank God. The rest of it is still a matter of argument. As soon as David Miller resigned, decided he wasn't going to run again, and Ford was elected, he has got a pretty old-fashioned view of what street transit is, and he wanted to get rid of streetcars. And he equated the Transit City plans with streetcars, and in effect canceled the whole situation, claimed that he was going to make sure that there were subways on Shepherd and Finch instead of what he called glorified streetcars, and that's where the current arguments began. And then it spread to the Scarborough RT, which was going to be replaced by a state-of-the-art LRT, and said that's got to be a subway, and so on. We all know what happened then. So there's been a constant argument with very, very bitter debate ever since. And we're still in a bit of a mess right now, deciding what really needs to be done. The one major flaw with the Miller plan, as you call it, the Transit City plan, was that there was no proposal for a downtown loop line interconnecting with some of the east and west LRT lines. So had that plan been implemented as it was shown, you'd have even worse conditions at places like Bloor-Yonge and St. George. And the downtown subways would be even more impacted than they are today. So there was a major, major missing link in that plan. But I mean, that's since been added in spades, because now most people are supporting the idea of the downtown relief line, as they call it. Regional relief line, I call it. The little problem is that we don't have any money to build it. But that's the thing that's needed, and as soon as we can possibly arrange to get it done. Council also approved the entire Eglinton line from Weston, Jane Street or Weston Road, all the way to Scarborough underground. And it was, the estimate of cost was $8 billion, $8 billion, which was all that the province had to give us at that time. Would have taken up all of that grant with no money for anything else. And that was done just to satisfy Rob Ford. There was a long and bitter debate that followed, which resulted in just the central tunnel and half the line at grade. How that's going to work remains to be seen, but that's what the current plan is. And then that was before the debate about the Scarborough thing even began, because Ford's plan was to have a subway loop from on the Shepherd right-of-way and then back down the Scarborough town, from Scarborough Town Centre down to Bloor at Kennedy, Kennedy Eglinton, to have a continuous subway loop. So it was a long and very complicated debate. Finally, he insisted that Scarborough deserved a subway. How you figure out who deserves a subway? You know, if you have the proper density and demand, you deserve a subway. If you don't, you don't. But anyway, he managed to push that through too. And there was a lot of flip-flopping at council, including Karen Stintz, who was then the chief commissioner of the TTC. And I've never really understood why that happened, but that's what we've got now. And the current plan is an expensive boondoggle, which is not justified. And the first order of business should be to find some way to reverse that decision. It's embarrassing, but to go ahead with that, which could cost every tax-paying family in Toronto $1,200 a year, up to $1,200 to build that thing, and this is not being noised around that much, I think that's a disgrace, because the thing is not justified. In the meantime, what we really need, which is the some sort of relief subway, is waiting out in the wings with no financing. It's been on the books for decades and decades.